The dust swirled mercilessly across the barren Wyoming plains as Josephine Keller stepped down from the stagecoach, her trembling hands clutching a crumpled letter that had brought her 2,000 miles from Boston to this desolate frontier town called Cody. The journey had taken everything from her savings, her comfortable life as a seamstress, and nearly her resolve, all on the promise of marriage to a man she had never met. "Madam, this is your stop," the stagecoach driver announced, dropping her weathered trunk onto the dirt road without ceremony. He squinted at her, taking in her city clothes and the look of dismay that crossed her face as she surveyed the ramshackle buildings that constituted Cody, Wyoming territory. 1878. Josephine brushed the dust from her once fine blue traveling dress and adjusted her bonnet, which had seen better days after the grueling journey. At 22, she had never imagined herself a mail-order bride, but after her parents' deaths and the subsequent loss of their home to creditors, the advertisement in the Boston newspaper had seemed like divine intervention. "Are you sure this is Cody?" she asked, her throat dry from the dusty air. "I'm looking for the Jackson homestead. Mr. Theodore Jackson," the driver laughed, a harsh sound that scraped against her already fraying nerves. "Jackson Place. That's been abandoned for near on 6 months now. Old Theo died of fever last winter." The world seemed to tilt beneath Josephine's feet. "That can't be right. I received a letter just 3 months ago confirming my arrival. Don't know what to tell you, miss. Jackson's dead and buried." With that, the driver climbed back onto his seat, flicked the reins, and left Josephine alone on the street with nothing but her trunk and the devastating realization that she had traveled across the country to marry a dead man. Night was approaching rapidly, painting the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. Josephine felt tears threatening, but she forced them back. Crying would solve nothing. She needed shelter and direction. With as much dignity as she could muster, she lifted her trunk and began dragging it toward the only building with bright lights, a saloon aptly named the Lucky Strike. The batwing doors swung open as she approached, and a tall figure stepped out, silhouetted against the golden light from within. He paused, taking in her disheveled appearance and the trunk she dragged behind her. "You look a mite lost, madam," he said, his voice low and gentle, a stark contrast to his imposing height. Josephine straightened her spine. "I am looking for Theodore Jackson. I was to be his bride." The man stepped fully into the fading light, and Josephine's breath caught. He was perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of the stormy sea. His dark blonde hair was too long for fashion, curling slightly at the nape of his neck, and a day's growth of beard shadowed his strong jaw. He wore simple clothes, a faded blue shirt, worn leather vest, and dust-covered denims tucked into scuffed boots, but carried himself with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. "I'm afraid you found only dust, madam," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "Theo passed on during the winter fever, so I've just learned," Josephine replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "It seems I've traveled 2,000 miles for nothing." The man studied her for a long moment. "Not for nothing," he said finally. "You found me instead. Name's Nathan Hayes. I was Theo's neighbor and friend." He extended a work-roughened hand. "And I think I might be able to help you, miss. Keller, Josephine Keller." She hesitated before taking his hand, noting the gentleness of his grip despite his obvious strength. "Miss Keller, this isn't a conversation for the street. May I buy you a meal while we figure out your situation?" Josephine glanced at the saloon dubiously. "I couldn't possibly, not in there," Nathan said with a quick smile that transformed his face. "Mrs. Benson runs a respectable boarding house just down the street. Best apple pie in the territory, too." Exhaustion and hunger warred with propriety, but practicality won out. "That would be most appreciated, Mr. Hayes." Nathan picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing. "Just Nathan, please." Mr. Hayes was my father, and he was a far more respectable man than I'll ever be. As they walked down the dusty street in the gathering twilight, Josephine sensed she had reached a crossroads in her life. The future she had planned lay in ashes, but perhaps from those ashes, something unexpected might rise. Mrs. Benson's boarding house was a 2-story white clapboard building that stood out among the rough-hewn structures of Cody. It boasted actual curtains in the windows and a small but well-tended garden in front. Nathan led Josephine up the steps and knocked on the door, which was promptly opened by a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. "Nathan Hayes, twice in 1 week." "The town will talk," she teased before noticing Josephine. Her expression softened. "And who might this be, Mrs. Benson?" "This is Miss Josephine Keller. She's traveled from Boston to marry Theodore Jackson." Understanding immediately dawned in the older woman's eyes. "Oh, you poor dear." Come in, come in. You must be exhausted and starving." Before Josephine could protest, she was ushered into a warm kitchen that smelled of baked bread and cinnamon. Mrs. Benson settled her at a scrubbed wooden table and bustled about, setting out plates of roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread, clucking sympathetically all the while. "Theo's nephew sent those letters," Nathan explained as they ate. "James Jackson. He's been trying to claim Theo's land, but the old man left a will saying it would go to his bride if he passed before she arrived. If no bride came within a year of his death, then James would inherit." Josephine set down her fork, appetite suddenly gone. "So this nephew deceived me to prevent my claiming the land." "That's my guess," Nathan nodded. "James likely figured you'd arrive, find Theo dead, and leave immediately. He probably never counted on anyone informing you of the will." "How do you know about this will?" Josephine asked. "Because I witnessed it," Nathan replied. "Theo and I became friends after I bought the neighboring property 3 years ago. He was a good man, Miss Keller. He spoke often of wanting a wife, children. When he placed that advertisement, he was genuinely seeking companionship. And now I'm here and he's gone." Josephine blinked back tears. "What am I to do? I spent everything I had on the journey here." Mrs. Benson patted her hand. "First, you'll stay here tonight. Things always look brighter in the morning. And tomorrow," Nathan said, "we'll visit Judge Parker. He holds Theo's will. If you were the woman Theo was corresponding with, the land is rightfully yours." Josephine looked at him in surprise. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Something flickered in Nathan's eyes, compassion, perhaps, or something deeper. "Because Theo was my friend, and he would have wanted you taken care of. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "James Jackson is not a man who should own good land. He'd sell it to the mining company that's been buying up properties around here, and they'd strip it bare." Later, after Mrs. Benson had shown Josephine to a small but clean room, she stood by the window watching the stars emerge over the distant mountains. The day's events swirled in her mind like the dust on the plains. She had come to Wyoming to marry a stranger and begin a new life. The stranger was gone, but perhaps the new life was still possible. With that thought, she drifted into a dreamless sleep, more exhausted than she had realized. Morning came with the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting up from downstairs. Josephine dressed quickly in her second-best dress, a modest green cotton with white lace at the collar, and made her way downstairs. Nathan was already there, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt, talking quietly with Mrs. Benson. He stood when Josephine entered, and she noticed again how tall he was, how his presence seemed to fill the room without effort. "Good morning, Miss Keller. I trust you slept well." Better than I expected, thank you. Breakfast was a hearty affair: eggs, bacon, biscuits with honey and strong coffee. Josephine ate with more appetite than she had felt in days, aware of Nathan's occasional glances in her direction. After breakfast, they set out for the judge's office, located in the small courthouse at the center of town. Cody looked different in the morning light, still rough-hewn and dusty, but with a certain vibrant energy as shopkeepers opened their establishments and townspeople went about their business. Judge Parker was a thin, elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose and a demeanor that suggested he had seen it all and was no longer surprised by human behavior. He listened attentively as Nathan explained the situation, occasionally nodding and glancing at Josephine. "I remember the will clearly," the judge said when Nathan finished. "Theodore Jackson was quite specific. His property was to go to his bride should she arrive within a year of his passing. If I recall correctly, he named a Miss Josephine Keller from Boston." Josephine's heart jumped. "That's me." Judge Parker peered at her over his spectacles. "Do you have any proof of identity, young lady?" Josephine reached into her reticule and withdrew several letters. "I have the correspondence from Mr. Jackson and my identification papers from Boston." The judge examined the documents carefully. "These appear to be in order. The handwriting matches samples I have from Theodore. However, there is a complication." "James Jackson," Nathan guessed. "Indeed. He filed a claim yesterday stating that the year has passed and the property should transfer to him as the sole heir." "But that's not true," Josephine protested. "Mr. Jackson passed away only 6 months ago, according to what I've been told." 7 months and 3 days, Judge Parker confirmed. "Mr. James Jackson is attempting to manipulate the timeline to his advantage. Unfortunately for him, I keep meticulous records." He smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "The property is rightfully yours, Miss Keller, as Theodore intended." Relief flooded through Josephine, followed quickly by uncertainty. I'm not sure what to do with land. I was prepared to be a wife, not a property owner." "The Jackson place is good land," Nathan said. 160 acres with water rights to Spring Creek, a solid house, and a small herd of cattle. Theo kept it running well. It could provide you a good living if you're willing to learn." "Or you could sell it," Judge Parker suggested. "James might still buy it from you, though I advise caution in dealing with him." "I won't sell to James," Josephine said firmly, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "Not after his deception, but I know nothing about ranching." "I could help," Nathan offered. "My property borders Theo's yours now. I could show you the basics, get you started. For a partnership share, perhaps?" Judge Parker raised his eyebrows. "That could work. A legal partnership, strictly business, of course." "Of course," Nathan echoed, though something in his eyes made Josephine's cheeks warm. "I would need to see the property first," she said. "I can take you there today," Nathan replied. By noon, they were riding toward the Jackson property in Nathan's wagon. Josephine sat beside him on the wooden seat, watching as the town gave way to open country. The landscape was unlike anything she had seen before: vast stretches of sage-dotted plains rising gradually toward distant mountains that seemed painted against the impossibly blue sky. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "So different from Boston." "Takes some getting used to," Nathan acknowledged. "The openness can be overwhelming at first, but there's a freedom here you won't find in the city." "Is that why you came west?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Partly. I was in the Army 7th Cavalry. After Gettysburg, I'd seen enough of war and death. Wanted something different." "You fought in the war?" Josephine asked softly. "Too young to enlist properly. Lied about my age. I was 16 at Little Round Top." His voice held echoes of memories he clearly preferred not to revisit. "But that's ancient history now." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the steady clopping of the horses' hooves. Josephine found herself studying Nathan's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar near his right temple, the way the corners of his eyes crinkled slightly even when he wasn't smiling. "There it is," he said finally, pointing to a structure that had appeared on the horizon. As they drew closer, Josephine could see a substantial log house with a stone chimney, a large barn, and several outbuildings, all situated near a creek lined with cottonwood trees. A small herd of cattle grazed in a nearby pasture. "This is all mine?" she asked in disbelief. "It is now," Nathan confirmed. "Theo built it himself, added onto it over the years. He was proud of this place." They stopped in front of the house, and Nathan helped Josephine down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her. The inside of the house was simple but well crafted: a large main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with an iron stove, a bedroom off to one side, and a ladder leading to a loft space above. Everything was covered in a layer of dust, but the furnishings were solid and well made. "It needs a woman's touch," Nathan said, watching as Josephine ran her fingers along a wooden table. "But the bones are good." "It's more than I expected," she admitted. "I thought, well, I wasn't sure what to think, but this is a real home. Theo wanted it to be welcoming for his bride." Nathan looked around the room. "He was excited about your coming, talked about it for weeks after he got your acceptance letter." Josephine felt a pang of sadness for the man she would never meet. "What was he like?" Nathan leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "Older than me by about 20 years. Quiet but thoughtful. Good with his hands, built all this himself. He wasn't looking for a young wife to work herself to death. He wanted companionship, someone to share his life with." He met her eyes. "He would have been good to you, Josephine." It was the first time he had used her given name, and it sounded different in his voice, more personal, almost intimate. "I believe that," she said softly. They spent the afternoon exploring the property. Nathan showed her the barn, the chicken coop, empty now, but ready for new occupants, the spring house where food could be kept cool, and the garden plot that had gone to weeds. "It's overwhelming," Josephine confessed as they stood by the creek, watching the water sparkle in the afternoon sun. "I don't know the first thing about any of this." "You can learn," Nathan said simply, "if you want to. And if I can't," he shrugged, "then you sell and go back east, but I think you'd be selling yourself short." Josephine studied him. "Why do you care what happens to me or this land?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze on the distant mountains. "I made a promise to Theo that I'd look after his bride if anything happened to him. I keep my promises." He turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "But beyond that?" "I think you have grit, Josephine Keller. You traveled across the country alone to marry a man you'd never met. That takes courage. Or desperation," she countered. "Sometimes they look the same from the outside," he said with a slight smile. "But either way, you're here now. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" It was a question Josephine couldn't answer, not yet. As they drove back to town in the gathering dusk, she found herself thinking not just about the land and what it represented, but about the man beside her, his quiet strength, his integrity, the way his presence made her feel both unsettled and strangely safe. Mrs. Benson welcomed them back with hot supper and curious glances, but asked no questions. After they ate, Nathan rose to leave. "I'll come by tomorrow morning if you'd like," he offered. "We could go back to the property, start making plans for what needs doing first." "You assume I've decided to stay," Josephine said. Nathan paused at the door. "Haven't you?" She realized with surprise that she had. The thought of returning to Boston held no appeal. There was nothing for her there but memories and struggle. Here at least she had land, a home of sorts, and the possibility of building something new. "Yes," she said, "I believe I have." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the plains. "Good. I'll see you in the morning then." After he left, Mrs. Benson settled into a chair across from Josephine, knitting needles clicking in her capable hands. "He's a good man, Nathan Hayes," she remarked casually. "Keeps to himself mostly, but always the first to help when someone's in need." "He seems to be," Josephine agreed, trying to sound neutral. "Hasn't shown this much interest in anyone since he came to Cody 3 years ago," the older woman continued, eyes on her knitting. "Not that there haven't been those who tried to catch his attention. Widow Jenkins has been baking him pies for 2 years running." Despite herself, Josephine felt a flutter of something that felt suspiciously like jealousy. "He's simply honoring a promise to his friend," she said. Mrs. Benson looked up, her eyes twinkling. "If you say so, dear." The next morning, Josephine was ready when Nathan arrived. She had purchased a few necessities from the general store, cleaning supplies, food staples, and a pair of sturdy boots that the shopkeeper's wife assured her would be more practical than her city shoes. "I see you're serious about this," Nathan commented as he loaded her purchases into the wagon. "I don't do anything halfway, Mr. Hayes," she replied primly, though she couldn't help smiling at his raised eyebrow. "Back to Mr. Hayes, are we? And here I thought we were making progress." The drive to the Jackson property, her property, now seemed shorter than it had the day before. Josephine found herself eagerly looking for landmarks she recognized, anticipation building as they approached the homestead. "We should start with cleaning the house," she decided as they unloaded the wagon. "Then assess what else needs immediate attention." Nathan nodded approvingly. "Practical approach. I like it." They worked together throughout the morning, sweeping out dust and cobwebs, washing windows, and airing bedding. Josephine was grateful for her practical upbringing. Though her family had been middle class in Boston, her mother had ensured she knew how to manage a household. By midday, the main room and kitchen were clean, and sunlight streamed through sparkling windows. Nathan built a fire in the stone fireplace to chase away the lingering dampness, and they sat down to a simple meal of bread, cheese, and apples at the now gleaming table. "It already feels different," Josephine observed, looking around with satisfaction. "Amazing what a woman's touch can do," Nathan agreed. "Though I have to admit, you surprised me today. Most city ladies I've met would have balked at the amount of dust we tackled." "I'm not most city ladies," Josephine retorted. "My father was a schoolteacher, but my mother came from farming stock. She made sure I could cook, clean, and mend alongside my reading and arithmetic." "A well-rounded education," Nathan said with approval. "That will serve you well here." After lunch, they ventured outside to assess the more daunting tasks. The cattle, a small herd of about 30 head, seemed healthy but would need regular attention. The garden needed complete rehabilitation. The chicken coop required repairs before new chickens could be acquired. "It's too much for one person," Josephine admitted as they walked back toward the house. "I see why you suggested a partnership." "It would be beneficial for both of us," Nathan said. "My place is twice this size, but I'm stretched thin managing it alone. Together, we could run both properties more efficiently. Share labor, equipment, even combine herds for drives to market." "A strictly business arrangement," Josephine clarified. Something flickered in Nathan's eyes, amusement perhaps, or challenge. "Of course, though people will talk." "They always do. Let them talk," Josephine said with more confidence than she felt. "I didn't come all this way to be ruled by gossip." Nathan laughed, a rich sound that seemed to warm the air between them. "Theo would have liked you, Josephine Keller. He appreciates spirit." "Tell me more about him," she requested as they settled on the porch steps to watch the sunset paint the western sky in gold and crimson. Nathan told stories about Theodore Jackson, how he'd come west after the war, built the homestead from nothing, survived blizzards and drought, and the constant threats that came with frontier life. How he'd never lost his fundamental optimism, or his belief that it was never too late to start again. "That's why he advertised for a bride," Nathan explained. "He said he'd spent enough years alone with just his thoughts for company, wanted someone to share his sunset years with." "I wish I could have met him," Josephine said softly. "He would have adored you," Nathan replied with quiet certainty. "Almost as much as he would have wanted you to be happy here, with or without him." The words hung in the air between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. As dusk deepened into true night, Nathan reluctantly announced it was time to return to town. "You could stay here tonight," Josephine suggested impulsively. "It is your home now." "Not without a proper chaperone," Nathan said, though his eyes held regret. "Mrs. Benson would have my hide, and the town would never let you hear the end of it." He was right, of course. Josephine's reputation was already precarious, a woman alone, entering a business partnership with a bachelor. Any hint of impropriety would make her position in Cody untenable. "We'll come back tomorrow," he promised as he helped her into the wagon. "Bring more supplies, start making this place truly yours." "Ours," she corrected, "if we're to be partners." His smile was visible even in the gathering darkness. "Ours then." Over the next 2 weeks, Josephine and Nathan fell into a rhythm, working from dawn until dusk to bring the Jackson homestead back to life. They repaired fences, cleaned out the spring house, planted a garden, and purchased chickens from a neighboring farm. Nathan taught Josephine the basics of cattle ranching, how to recognize signs of illness, the importance of water access, the best grazing practices for the Wyoming terrain. Each evening, they would return to town, Josephine to her room at Mrs. Benson's boarding house, Nathan to his small cabin on the edge of Cody. And each morning, they would set out again, their conversations growing easier, their understanding of each other deepening with every passing day. Josephine found herself watching Nathan when he wasn't looking, the graceful economy of his movements, the gentleness with which he handled animals, the way the sun brought out golden highlights in his hair. She noticed how his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how his hands were calloused but always gentle when helping her over rough ground, how he listened intently when she spoke, as if her words mattered. For his part, Nathan seemed increasingly reluctant to leave each evening, finding reasons to linger, a fence that needed one more nail, a story he just remembered, a star constellation he wanted to show her. It was during the 3rd week that they encountered James Jackson for the first time. They were returning from town, the wagon loaded with supplies, when they saw a rider approaching from the north. Nathan's posture immediately stiffened. "James," he said grimly, "I was wondering when he'd show up." James Jackson proved to be a sharp contrast to Nathan, shorter, wiry, with close-set eyes and a mouth that seemed set in a perpetual sneer. He reined his horse to a stop beside their wagon, blocking the path. "Well, well," he drawled, "if it isn't Hayes and the mail-order bride." "Getting cozy, aren't you? State your business, James," Nathan said coldly. "Just came to see what you've done with my uncle's place," James replied, his gaze sliding over Josephine in a way that made her skin crawl. "Still think you were cheated out of your inheritance, Miss Keller?" "My uncle wasn't in his right mind when he made that will." "Judge Parker seemed to think differently," Josephine said evenly. "And the property is legally mine now." James spat on the ground. "Legal don't make it right. That land's been in the Jackson family for years." Your uncle was free to leave it to whomever he chose, Nathan pointed out, and he chose his intended bride. Convenient for you both, wasn't it? She gets the land and you get. What exactly are you getting out of this arrangement, Hayes? Nathan's knuckles whitened on the reins, but his voice remained steady. Miss Keller and I have a business partnership, not that it's any of your concern. James laughed, an unpleasant sound. Business, is it? That's not what folks in town are saying. I don't care what people say, Josephine interjected, her patience wearing thin. Now please move aside. We have work to do. The mining company's offer still stands, James said, not budging. $5,000 for the whole spread. More money than you'd see in 10 years of struggling with this place. The land is not for sale, Josephine stated firmly. Not to you, not to any mining company. James's expression hardened. You'll regret that decision, Miss Keller. This is hard country for a woman alone. She's not alone, Nathan said quietly, the threat in his voice unmistakable. For a moment the two men locked eyes in silent challenge. Then James shrugged and backed his horse away. Have it your way, for now. He tipped his hat mockingly. Madam, Hayes. They watched him ride off, dust billowing behind him. Will he cause trouble? Josephine asked once he was out of earshot. Nathan clicked to the horses to get them moving again. Most likely. James has always been the type to take what he wants, regardless of who gets hurt. And he wants this land badly. Why? It's good land, but surely there's plenty available in Wyoming territory. It's the water rights, Nathan explained. Spring Creek runs year-round, even in drought years. That's rare and valuable. The mining company wants it for their operations up in the hills. Josephine frowned. Would that affect other properties? It would affect everyone downstream, including my place. They divert the water, pollute what they don't use. It would be disastrous for the entire valley. Then I'm even more determined not to sell, Josephine declared. Nathan glanced at her, something like admiration in his eyes. Theo chose well when he picked you, Josephine Keller. That evening they decided Josephine should move permanently to the homestead. James's appearance had underscored the vulnerability of leaving the property unattended, and the house was now clean and habitable. Nathan would continue to spend nights in town, but he would ride out at first light each morning. It's not ideal, he admitted as they discussed the arrangement over supper at Mrs. Benson's table. I don't like the thought of you out there alone, especially with James sniffing around. I'll be fine, Josephine assured him, though the prospect of nights alone in the isolated homestead was daunting. I can handle a rifle, can't I? You taught me yourself. Knowing how to shoot and being willing to use it against a man are different things, Nathan pointed out. I'll manage, Josephine insisted. Besides, it's only until we can make more permanent arrangements. Mrs. Benson, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. I have a suggestion if you'll hear it. When they both looked at her, she continued, My niece, Sarah, is arriving from Denver next week. She's 17 and looking for work. She could stay at the homestead as Josephine's companion and help with the household duties. That could work, Nathan said slowly. An extra pair of hands would be useful, and having another person there would be safer. And more proper, Mrs. Benson added meaningfully. Josephine understood the implication. A young, unmarried woman living on an isolated homestead and working closely with an unmarried man was fodder for gossip. Having another woman present would provide a buffer against the worst of the talk. I think it's an excellent solution, she agreed. When can she start? The next day, Nathan helped Josephine move her few belongings to the homestead. They worked together to make the bedroom comfortable, airing the mattress one final time and putting fresh linens on the bed. The loft would be prepared for Sarah's arrival the following week. As evening approached, Josephine felt a growing nervousness at the prospect of spending the night alone. Nathan seemed equally reluctant to leave, finding increasingly minor tasks to complete before darkness fell completely. Finally, standing on the porch in the deepening twilight, he could delay no longer. "I've loaded the rifle. It's by the door. Keep it close." "I will," she promised, "and I'll be back at first light, earlier if you need me. Just fire 3 shots in the air and I'll come running." His concern touched her. "I'll be fine, Nathan, truly," he nodded, but still didn't move toward his horse. "Josephine, He stopped, seeming to struggle for words, then simply said, "Be careful. I always am." After he rode away, Josephine secured the door and windows, checked the rifle as Nathan had taught her, and tried to settle in for the night. The house seemed vast and empty without his presence, every creak and rustle magnified in the silence. She lit a lamp and tried to read, but found herself listening for sounds outside, imagining James Jackson or some other threat lurking in the darkness. Eventually, exhaustion overcame anxiety, and she fell into a fitful sleep. The next morning, true to his word, Nathan arrived as the first light was breaking over the eastern hills. Josephine, who had been up since before dawn, felt ridiculous relief at the sight of him riding across the pasture. "Any trouble?" he asked immediately. "None at all," she assured him. "Though I jump at every sound like a nervous kitten," he smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing visibly. "You'll get used to the night sounds. It just takes time." Over breakfast, they discussed the day's tasks. Nathan wanted to check the northern fence line, while Josephine planned to continue organizing the house and preparing the second bedroom for Sarah's arrival. "I've been thinking," Nathan said as they cleared the breakfast dishes. "We should formalize our partnership. Have Judge Parker draw up proper papers." "Is that necessary? I trust you." "It's not about trust. It's about protection for both of us. If anything happened to either of us, the survivor's position would be clear. No one could contest it, not even James." Josephine hadn't considered that aspect. "You're right, of course. When shall we do it?" "I'll speak to Judge Parker when I go into town tomorrow. He can draw up the documents and we can sign them when they're ready." As Nathan saddled his horse to ride the fence line, Josephine found herself studying him again, noting the easy grace with which he moved, the quiet competence in everything he did. In just a few weeks, he had become essential to her in a way she hadn't anticipated. "Be careful out there," she called as he mounted. "Come back for dinner." He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, smiled that smile that made her heart flutter, and rode off toward the northern pasture. Alone again, Josephine threw herself into domestic tasks, determined to make the house truly hers. She unpacked her few personal items, a framed daguerreotype of her parents, a small collection of books, the hand-stitched quilt her mother had made for her hope chest. These she arranged carefully, creating small touches of familiarity in her new home. By mid-afternoon, she had finished inside and ventured to the garden, where she spent an hour weeding the newly planted vegetables. The work was satisfying, connecting her to the land in a tangible way. This was her home now, her future. The realization brought unexpected contentment. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't hear the approaching rider until he was nearly upon her. Looking up, expecting Nathan, she instead found herself facing James Jackson. "Afternoon, Miss Keller," he said, dismounting smoothly. "Thought I'd pay a neighborly visit." Josephine stood, brushing dirt from her hands, acutely aware of being alone. "Mr. Jackson, this is unexpected." "Just wanted to see how you're settling in," he said, his gaze roaming over the property. "Looks like you and Hayes have been busy." "We have." Josephine moved toward the house, wanting to put space between them. "I'm afraid I can't offer refreshments at the moment. I wasn't expecting company." James followed her, No need to stand on ceremony. We're practically family after all." "I don't see how that could be true," Josephine replied coolly. "You were to marry my uncle. That would have made you my aunt in a manner of speaking." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Though you seem to have found a replacement quickly enough." "Mr. Hayes and I are business partners, nothing more," Josephine said firmly, though the words felt like a lie on her tongue. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" James stepped closer, blocking her path to the house. "I have to admit, you're prettier than I expected from a mail-order bride. Uncle Theo had good taste." Josephine's hand went to the small knife she had taken to keeping in her pocket. "Mr. Jackson, I think you should leave." "Now, that's not very hospitable." Another step closer. "I just came to make you another offer. The mining company has increased its bid. $7,000. That's a fortune for a woman alone. I've already told you the land is not for sale. Everything has a price, Miss Keller." James reached out as if to touch her face. "Everything and everyone." Josephine backed away, her heart pounding. "Leave now or You'll what?" he sneered. "Scream, no one will hear you. Hayes is miles away, checking that broken fence on the north side." Ice flooded Josephine's veins. How did he know where Nathan was? Before she could respond, a rifle shot cracked through the air. James whirled around to see Nathan riding hard toward them, rifle raised. "Step away from her, James," Nathan called, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. James's face contorted with fury, but he backed up, hands raised in mock surrender. "Just having a friendly conversation, Hayes. No need for firearms." Nathan reached them, dismounting without lowering the rifle. "Josephine, are you all right?" "I'm fine," she assured him, moving to his side. "Mr. Jackson was just leaving." "This isn't over," James spat as he climbed back onto his horse. "That land will be mine one way or another." "It will never be yours," Nathan replied evenly. "Now ride out before I forget my manners entirely." They watched as James galloped away, his horse kicking up dust that hung in the air long after he had disappeared from sight. "Are you really all right?" Nathan asked, turning to Josephine, his eyes scanning her for any sign of harm. "Did he hurt you?" "No, just frightened me a bit," she admitted. "How did you know to come back?" "I didn't like leaving you alone with James in the area. I circled back to check on you." His jaw tightened. "Good thing I did." "He knew you were checking the north fence," Josephine said. "He's been watching us." Nathan nodded grimly. "I suspected as much." "He's not going to give up easily." "What do? "We stay vigilant," Nathan replied. "And I don't leave you alone again until Sarah arrives." "But that's nearly a week away," Josephine protested. "You can't neglect your own property for that long." "Watch me," Nathan said with quiet determination. "I'll sleep in the barn if I have to, but I'm not leaving you unprotected with James prowling around." His protectiveness should have chafed against Josephine's independent nature, but instead she felt a wave of warmth at his concern. "Thank you," she said simply. That evening, after they had secured the house and eaten supper, they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. The night was cool but not cold, scented with sage and the promise of rain. "I never saw stars like this in Boston," Josephine remarked, tilting her head back to take in the glittering expanse. "They seem closer here, more immediate." "Less competing light," Nathan explained, "and clearer air. But I know what you mean. It's one of the things I love most about this place, the sky at night." "What else do you love about it?" she asked, genuinely curious. Nathan was quiet for a moment, considering. "The freedom, I suppose. The sense that a man is measured by what he does, not who his family was or how much money he has." He glanced at her. "What about you? Is there anything you love about Wyoming yet?" Josephine thought about the question. "I love the mornings," she said finally. The way the light comes over the mountains and turns everything golden for a few minutes. I love the smell of sage after rain, and I love—" She stopped, suddenly aware of where her thoughts were leading. "And you love," Nathan prompted gently. "The sense of possibility," she finished. "That I could make something here, something that's truly mine." "Ours," he corrected, echoing her words from days earlier. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. Josephine was acutely aware of Nathan beside her, of the warmth radiating from his body, of how easy it would be to lean slightly and rest against his shoulder. "I should check the horses one more time," Nathan said finally, standing. "Then I'll bed down in the barn." "You don't have to sleep in the barn," Josephine said impulsively. "The loft is perfectly comfortable. I put fresh bedding up there for Sarah." Nathan hesitated. "That's kind, but people would talk if they knew I stayed in the house." "People will talk regardless," Josephine pointed out. "And I'd feel better knowing you were close by." After a moment, Nathan nodded. "All right, the loft it is." True to his word, Nathan spent the next several nights in the loft, his presence in the house both reassurance and distraction for Josephine. They settled into a domestic routine that felt surprisingly natural, sharing meals, dividing chores, talking long into the evening about everything from books they had read to their hopes for the future of the ranch. There was no further sign of James Jackson, but they remained vigilant, never venturing far from the house alone. Nathan taught Josephine more about handling firearms, insisting she practice daily until she could hit a target consistently at 30 paces. "You're a natural," he commented after one particularly successful session. "Good eye, steady hand." "I never thought I'd become proficient with a gun," Josephine admitted. "My mother would be scandalized." Nathan's laugh was warm. "Somehow I think she'd understand the necessity, given the circumstances." On the day before Sarah was due to arrive, they rode into town together to sign the partnership agreement Judge Parker had prepared. The document was straightforward, stating that Nathan and Josephine would jointly operate both properties, sharing expenses and profits equally. In the event of either partner's death, their share would transfer to the survivor. "This protects both of you," Judge Parker explained as they read through the agreement. "Particularly you, Miss Keller. Should anything happen to you, the property would not revert to James Jackson as Theo's nearest relative, but would go to Mr. Hayes instead." "And if something happened to both of us?" Josephine asked, not missing the dark look that crossed Nathan's face at the question. "In that case, you can specify an alternate beneficiary," the judge replied. "Though I sincerely hope such a provision never comes into play." After considering for a moment, Josephine said, "I would like to name Mrs. Elizabeth Benson as the alternate beneficiary for my share. She has been kind to me, and I believe she would use the property wisely." Nathan nodded approval. "A good choice. I'll name her for my share as well." With the amended agreement prepared, they both signed the document, making their partnership official. As they left the judge's office, Josephine felt a curious mixture of relief and apprehension. The partnership bound her and Nathan together in a legal, tangible way, yet the nature of their personal relationship remained undefined. They collected Sarah from the afternoon stage, coach a bright-eyed, freckle-faced girl with a practical manner that Josephine liked immediately. Sarah chattered happily on the ride to the homestead, seemingly unfazed by the prospect of living miles from town. "Aunt Lizzie says you're from Boston," she said to Josephine. "I've always wanted to visit the East. Is it true the buildings are so tall you can't see the tops?" Josephine smiled. "Some of them, yes. Though I think you'll find the mountains here far more impressive than any building made by man." With Sarah installed in the loft, Nathan reluctantly prepared to return to his own property for the first time in nearly a week. "I'll be back tomorrow morning," he promised as he saddled his horse. "Remember, 3 shots if there's trouble." "We'll be fine," Josephine assured him, though she felt oddly bereft at the prospect of his absence. "Go tend to your own place. It must need attention after all this time." Nathan mounted his horse but didn't immediately ride away. "Josephine, he paused, seeming to search for words. "Yes." But whatever he had been about to say remained unspoken. "Nothing, just sleep well." As Josephine watched him ride away, Sarah came to stand beside her on the porch. "He's sweet on you," the girl observed matter-of-factly. "Don't be ridiculous," Josephine protested, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "We're business partners." Sarah's knowing smile was far too wise for her 17 years. "If you say so, Miss Keller." The next morning brought dark clouds and the promise of rain. Josephine woke early, anticipating Nathan's arrival, but as the hours passed with no sign of him, concern began to gnaw at her. It wasn't like him to be late, especially when he had promised to return. By midday, with rain beginning to fall in earnest, Josephine made a decision. "Sarah, I'm going to ride over to Mr. Hayes's property to check on him. He should have been here by now." "In this weather?" Sarah glanced dubiously at the sheets of rain visible through the window. "Maybe he just decided to wait out the storm." "Maybe," Josephine agreed, "but I'd feel better making sure. You stay here and mind the house." Donning a heavy oilcloth coat Nathan had left behind, Josephine saddled the more docile of their 2 horses and set out. Nathan had shown her the way to his property several times, and she followed the familiar trail despite the deteriorating conditions. The rain grew heavier as she rode, turning the path muddy and treacherous. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Josephine urged her horse to a faster pace, worry mounting with each passing minute. Nathan's homestead came into view just as lightning split the sky, a larger version of her own place, with a 2-story house and several outbuildings scattered around a central yard. But something was wrong. Even through the curtain of rain, Josephine could see that the front door stood open, banging in the wind. Approaching cautiously, she called out, "Nathan, are you here?" No answer came. She dismounted, tied her horse to the porch rail, and drew the small pistol Nathan had insisted she carry. The house was eerily silent except for the rhythmic banging of the door against its frame. "Nathan," she called again, stepping inside. The interior was in disarray, furniture overturned, papers scattered, a lamp shattered on the floor. Signs of a struggle were evident everywhere. Josephine's heart pounded as she moved from room to room, finding each empty but disturbed. In the kitchen, a smear of blood on the doorframe stopped her cold. Not much perhaps from a minor wound, but blood nonetheless. Fear clawed at her throat. A sound from outside drew her attention, hoofbeats approaching rapidly. Josephine moved to the window, pistol ready, but relief flooded through her when she recognized the rider as Ben Miller, Nathan's nearest neighbor to the north. She met him on the porch as he dismounted. "Miss Keller," he said in surprise. "What are you doing here? Where's Nathan?" "I don't know," she replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I came looking for him. The house is empty, but there are signs of a fight, and blood." Ben's weathered face grew grim. "I was afraid of something like this. 3 men rode past my place headed this way just after dawn. Didn't recognize them, but they weren't friendly types." "James Jackson," Josephine whispered, the pieces falling into place. "He must be behind this." "The mining company has hired guns in town," Ben confirmed. "Everyone knows James has been trying to get both your properties." "We need to find Nathan," Josephine said, fear giving way to determination. "Where would they take him?" Ben considered for a moment. "There's an abandoned line shack about 5 miles west of here, near the old Carson claim." "If they wanted a place out of the way." "Show me," Josephine demanded. "Miss Keller, this is no job for a woman. Let me ride for the sheriff." "The sheriff is 2 hours away, and that's in good weather," she pointed out. "We don't have time. Please, Mr. Miller." Nathan would do the same for any of us. After a moment's hesitation, Ben nodded. "All right, but we do this carefully. Those men are killers." They rode west through the driving rain, Ben leading the way across terrain that grew increasingly rugged. The line shack, when they reached it, was barely visible through the downpour, a small, dilapidated structure nestled against a rocky outcropping. 2 horses were tethered under a lean-to beside the shack. No sign of a third. "James must have left already," Josephine whispered as they dismounted and tied their own horses in a stand of trees a short distance away. "Or never came at all," Ben suggested. "Men like that often hire others to do their dirty work." They approached cautiously, keeping to what cover they could find. Through a grimy window, Josephine could make out 2 figures inside rough-looking men playing cards at a rickety table. Of Nathan, there was no sign. "Maybe he's in the back," Ben murmured. "There's a small room behind the main area." "How do we get in?" Josephine asked. "I'll create a distraction out front. You circle around to the back. There should be a window or door." Before Josephine could protest the danger to him, Ben was moving, positioning himself near the front of the shack. She hurried around to the back, finding a small, dirt-crusted window set high in the wall. Standing on tiptoe, she peered inside and had to stifle a cry. Nathan was there, tied to a chair, his face bruised and bloodied. His shirt was torn, revealing more bruises across his chest and ribs. But he was alive. His chest rose and fell with each breath. A sudden commotion from the front of the shack drew her attention. Ben's distraction had begun. She could hear his voice calling out, claiming to be the sheriff with a posse. The ruse worked. Both men rushed outside, guns drawn. Josephine seized the moment. Finding the back door locked, she used the butt of her pistol to break the window, reached through to unlock the door, and slipped inside. "Nathan," she whispered, rushing to his side. His eyes opened slowly, focusing on her with disbelief. "Josephine, what are you doing here?" "Rescuing you, of course," she said, working at the ropes binding his wrists. "Can you walk?" "I think so," he grunted as the ropes fell away. "But we need to hurry. They'll figure out Ben's bluffing any minute now." Supporting Nathan as best she could, Josephine helped him to the door. They had just reached it when gunshots erupted from the front of the shack. Ben and the hired guns had opened fire on each other. "We have to help him," Nathan insisted. "You're in no condition to fight," Josephine protested. "Give me your gun," Nathan demanded. After a moment's hesitation, she handed it over. "Be careful." "Stay behind me," Nathan ordered, moving toward the front of the shack despite his obvious pain. They reached the main room just as one of the hired guns backed through the door, firing outside. He didn't see them until Nathan called out, "Drop it." The man whirled, raising his weapon, but Nathan was faster despite his injuries. 2 shots rang out and the hired gun crumpled to the floor. "Ben," Nathan called. "I'm here," came the response from outside. "Got the other one, but he winged me. Nothing serious." Nathan sagged against the doorframe, strength ebbing. "We need to get out of here. James could come back with more men." Together, they made their way to the horses, Nathan leaning heavily on Josephine. Ben's arm was bleeding from a bullet graze, but as he'd said, it wasn't serious. "My place is closest," Ben decided. "We'll go there, tend to our wounds, then decide what to do next." The ride to Ben's homestead was slow and painful, the rain continuing to pour from leaden skies. By the time they arrived, Nathan was barely conscious, slumped forward over his horse's neck. Ben's wife, Martha, a practical woman with experience in nursing, took charge immediately. "Get him to the spare room," she directed. Ben, you sit down before you fall down. Miss Keller, there's hot water on the stove. Bring it and the medical kit from the cupboard. Under Martha's capable hands, Nathan's wounds were cleaned and bandaged. 3 ribs were cracked but not broken. His face was badly bruised and he had a deep cut on his temple, but there were no life-threatening injuries. They knew what they were doing, Martha commented grimly. Hurt him enough to be convincing, but not enough to kill him outright. They wanted something from him. The deed to my property, Nathan confirmed weakly from the bed. James wants both ranches for the mining company. Offered to let me live if I signed it over. And if you refused, Josephine asked, though she already knew the answer. They'd kill me and forge the signature anyway, but they needed me alive long enough to tell them where the deed was hidden. Did you tell them? Ben asked. Nathan's smile was grim despite his split lip. Would you believe it's hidden in a Bible in the top drawer of my bureau? Right where they already looked but didn't recognize it. Despite the gravity of the situation, Josephine couldn't help but laugh. Oh, Nathan, you hid it in plain sight. Sometimes that's the best hiding place, he said, his eyes meeting hers with warmth that belied his battered condition. Once Nathan and Ben were resting, Josephine and Martha retreated to the kitchen to prepare a meal and discuss the situation. James Jackson won't stop, Josephine said, chopping vegetables with more force than necessary. He'll keep coming after us until he gets what he wants. Or until someone stops him permanently, Martha replied pragmatically. Men like that only understand one language power. We need proof of what he's done, Josephine mused. Something that would convince the sheriff to arrest him. One of those hired guns is dead, Martha pointed out. The other might talk to save his own neck. Josephine considered this. If we could get to him before James does. The sheriff's office in Cody has a jail. If he's wounded, that's where they'd take him. Then that's where I need to go, Josephine decided. Martha looked at her appraisingly. You're not what I expected from a mail-order bride, Miss Keller. I'm not what I expected either, Josephine admitted with a wry smile. After supper, Josephine sat by Nathan's bedside, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest as he slept. The rain had finally stopped and moonlight streamed through the window, casting silver patterns across the quilt. His eyes opened, finding hers immediately. You should be resting, he murmured. I'm not the one who was beaten, she replied softly. How do you feel? Like I was trampled by cattle, he admitted, but better for seeing you. Josephine reached out to brush a strand of hair from his forehead, her touch gentle. You frightened me today when I found your house empty with signs of a struggle. I'm sorry, he said. I never wanted to bring danger into your life. You didn't. James Jackson did. She took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. Nathan, I've been thinking, we need to end this once and for all. What do you propose? She told him her plan to speak with the surviving hired gun to get evidence against James that would stand up in court. Nathan listened, his expression growing increasingly troubled. It's too dangerous, he protested when she finished. James will be watching the jail if he sees you there. He won't, Josephine assured him. I'll be careful. But we can't live looking over our shoulders forever, Nathan. I want a life here, a real life. He studied her face in the moonlight. With me? He asked quietly. The question hung between them, laden with meaning. Josephine felt her heart quicken. Yes, she whispered. With you, Nathan's hand tightened around hers. Then we'll face this together. But not tomorrow. I need another day to heal before we confront James. All right, she agreed. One more day. They spent the next day at Ben and Martha's homestead, allowing Nathan time to regain his strength. Josephine sent word to Sarah via a passing cowhand, assuring the girl they were safe and would return soon. By evening, Nathan was able to move around with minimal assistance. though his ribs still caused him considerable pain. After dinner, they gathered around the kitchen table to refine their plan. "The hired gun is still in the Cody jail," Ben reported, having ridden into town that afternoon. "Name's Cal Denton, known gunslinger from Colorado. Sheriff says he's not talking, though." "He might talk to me," Nathan suggested, "if I offer him a deal testimony against James in exchange for leniency." "Can you make such a deal?" Josephine asked. "No, but Judge Parker can. And he will, if it means bringing James to justice." They decided to ride to Cody the next morning. Ben and Martha insisted on accompanying them, providing additional protection should James or his remaining men try to intervene. That night, Josephine found herself unable to sleep, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. She slipped outside onto the porch, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the cool night air. She wasn't alone for long. Nathan joined her, moving stiffly but determined. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, settling beside her on the porch swing. "Too much to think about," she admitted. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the swing and the distant call of a coyote. "I never thanked you properly," Nathan said finally. "For saving my life. You would have done the same for me." "Yes," he agreed. "But that doesn't lessen what you did. You rode out in a storm, faced armed men. You were braver than most men I know." Josephine smiled softly. "Perhaps I'm finally becoming a proper frontier woman." "There's nothing proper about you, Josephine Keller," Nathan replied, but his tone made it clear this was no criticism. "You're extraordinary." The word hung in the air between them, a truth too powerful to ignore. Josephine turned to face him, her heart pounding. "Nathan." Whatever she might have said was lost as he leaned forward, his lips finding hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. When they finally parted, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day you arrived in Cody, looking lost and determined all at once." "Even then?" she asked, breathless. "Even then?" He kissed her again, longer this time, less hesitant. "I think I've been waiting for you my whole life without even knowing it." Josephine's heart felt too full for words. She simply nodded, understanding exactly what he meant, for she felt the same. They rode into Cody the next morning, Nathan and Josephine, Ben and Martha, a small but determined convoy. The town was quiet, the main street nearly empty in the early hour. Their first stop was Judge Parker's office. The elderly jurist listened to their story with growing outrage, his thin face flushing with anger at the description of Nathan's beating. "This has gone far beyond property disputes," he declared when they finished. "This is attempted murder, kidnapping, conspiracy. James Jackson will hang if we can prove his involvement." "That's why we need to speak with Denton," Nathan explained. "Offer him a deal in exchange for testimony against James." Judge Parker nodded. "I'll authorize it." "Let's go to the jail now before word spreads that you're in town." But they were too late. As they approached the sheriff's office, they could see a crowd gathered outside. In the center stood James Jackson, gesticulating angrily at the sheriff. "I demand to speak with the prisoner." He was shouting. "He works for me," the sheriff, a stolid man with a magnificent mustache, stood his ground. "Not anymore, he doesn't. Denton's being charged with kidnapping and attempted murder. He'll hang unless he cooperates." "This is outrageous," James sputtered. "He was apprehending a trespasser on my property." "Your property?" The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Last I checked, the Hayes Ranch belongs to Nathan Hayes, not you." James caught sight of their group then, his face contorting with rage. "You," he spat, pointing at Nathan. "You should be dead." "That's enough, James," Judge Parker said, stepping forward. "You're only making things worse for yourself." "I've done nothing wrong," James insisted, but his eyes shifted nervously. "Cal Denton says differently," the sheriff interjected. "He's been singing like a canary since dawn, hoping to save his own neck." James's face went ashen. "He's lying. Whatever he told you, he told us you paid him and his partner $500 to force Hayes to sign over his deed," the sheriff cut in. "Said if Hayes refused, they were to kill him and make it look like an accident." "That's absurd. Why would I, because of the mining company's offer?" Josephine said, stepping forward. $20,000 for both properties, wasn't it? Once you had Nathan's land and mine." James's eyes narrowed. "You can't prove any of this." "Actually, we can," Judge Parker countered. "Denton kept the money you paid him. It's marked bills from the Cody Bank robbery last month. The serial numbers match. It was a bluff, but a good one." James's composure cracked. "This is a conspiracy against me. Hayes put Denton up to this." "It's over, James," Nathan said quietly. "The truth is out." With a roar of fury, James lunged at Nathan, drawing a hidden derringer from his vest pocket. Several things happened at once. Josephine screamed a warning, the sheriff reached for his weapon, and Ben stepped in front of Nathan. The derringer discharged with a sharp crack, and Ben staggered, clutching his shoulder. The sheriff's gun barked in response, and James crumpled to the ground, a red stain spreading across his chest. The next hour passed in a blur. The doctor was summoned for Ben, whose wound proved painful but not life-threatening. James was carried to the undertaker's, dead before he hit the ground. Statements were taken, documents signed, hands shaken. Through it all, Nathan stayed by Josephine's side, his presence steady and reassuring. When they finally emerged from the sheriff's office into the late afternoon sunshine, it felt as though days had passed rather than hours. "It's truly over," Josephine said wonderingly. "Yes," Nathan agreed. "James can't hurt anyone anymore." "What happens now?" Nathan took her hand, his eyes serious. "That depends on you, Josephine. Our partnership agreement is signed and legal. We could continue as planned, working the ranches together, building something lasting. But," she prompted, sensing more to come, "but I find I want more than a business partnership." He drew a deep breath. "I love you, Josephine Keller. I think I have from the moment you stepped down from that stagecoach, looking like you'd fight the whole world if you had to." Joy flooded through Josephine, bright and overwhelming. "I love you too, Nathan. I think I've been falling in love with you since you offered to help a stranger who traveled 2,000 miles to marry a dead man." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the plains. "Then marry a living one instead. Marry me, Josephine." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Cody, with the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Benson wept openly, declaring it the most romantic thing she'd ever witnessed. Sarah served as maid of honor, beaming with approval. Ben, his arm still in a sling, stood as Nathan's best man. Judge Parker performed the ceremony, his voice surprisingly strong as he pronounced them husband and wife. When Nathan kissed his bride, cheers erupted throughout the church, echoing the joy in Josephine's heart. The celebration continued well into the evening at the newly christened Hayes Ranch, the original Jackson homestead that had brought Josephine to Wyoming. Tables were set up in the yard, lanterns hung from tree branches, and music played as the community gathered to celebrate not just a marriage but a new beginning. As twilight deepened into night, Nathan led Josephine away from the festivities to a quiet spot beside Spring Creek, where the water gurgled softly over stones worn smooth by time. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist from behind. "Completely," she assured him, leaning back against his chest. "Though it's strange to think that none of this would have happened if Theodore Jackson had lived." "I believe some things are meant to be," Nathan said, his breath warm against her ear. "You were meant to come here, Josephine. If not for Theo, then for me." She turned in his arms to face him. "I came looking for a husband and found only dust," she said softly. "And I said you'd found me instead," he finished, smiling down at her. "Seems we were both right where we needed to be." As Nathan lowered his head to kiss her, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that this was true. She had traveled across the country seeking a new life, and had found not only that but a love deeper and truer than she had ever imagined possible. Here, in the vastness of Wyoming, with its endless skies and untamed beauty, she had found her home. Not in a place, but in a person, in Nathan's steadfast heart and unwavering love. And as the stars emerged overhead, brilliant against the velvet darkness, Josephine Hayes knew that this was just the beginning of their story. Over the years that followed, the Hayes Ranch flourished under their joint care. Nathan and Josephine expanded their cattle operation, added sheep when wool prices rose, and cultivated a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. Their partnership, in business as in life, proved to be a perfect balance of complementary strengths. Children came first: a daughter with Josephine's determination and Nathan's gentle eyes, then twin sons who grew tall and strong like their father but inherited their mother's quick minds and compassionate hearts. The house expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Nathan adding rooms as needed, always with an eye to both practicality and beauty. Cody grew as well, evolving from a rough frontier settlement to a proper town with a school, a bank, and eventually a railroad spur that connected it to the wider world. Josephine, drawing on her education, taught at the school for several years before the demands of the ranch and family claimed all her time. Sarah remained with them until she married the town's young doctor, settling in a house just down the street from Mrs. Benson's boarding house, which continued to welcome travelers and newcomers to Cody. Ben and Martha became like family, their children growing up alongside the Hayes children, sharing work and play across the connecting properties. Through it all, the harsh winters and scorching summers, the years of plenty and the inevitable lean times, Nathan and Josephine's love remained constant, deepening with each challenge faced and overcome together. On their 20th anniversary, Nathan presented Josephine with a gift: a small wooden box containing a gold locket. Inside was a tiny daguerreotype of them on their wedding day, young and hopeful, standing on the threshold of their shared life. 20 years, Josephine marveled, touching the image gently. "Sometimes it seems like yesterday that I stepped off that stagecoach." "Best day of my life," Nathan said, his hair now streaked with silver but his eyes as bright and loving as ever. "Though I still feel guilty about being grateful that poor Theo died." Josephine laughed, a sound that had filled their home with joy for 2 decades. "I think he would understand. He wanted his land to go to someone who would love it as he did, and he wanted his bride to be happy." Both wishes came true, just not in the way he expected. "Life rarely goes as expected," Nathan observed, drawing her close. "But sometimes, if you're very lucky, it turns out better than you ever dreamed." Standing in the home they had built together, surrounded by evidence of their shared life, children's drawings pinned to walls, books well thumbed from family readings, the quilt Josephine's mother had made now faded from years of use, they both knew this to be true. The mail-order bride had found more than dust. She had found love, purpose, and a place to belong. And the cowboy who had once stood alone had found a partner for the journey, someone to share both the burdens and the joys of life on the Wyoming frontier. It was, they both agreed, a fair exchange.